Good morning, all of you. Good morning. And thank you very much, Toyin, for that introduction. I have good news and very bad news. The good news is that I'm going to make a keynote address. And the other good news is that you are going to be keynote listeners. So can I have a nod of heads to agree that you're going to be keynote listeners? Which is very good. And now the bad news. The bad news is that my statement is 45 pages. So I don't know if you still wanted to be keynote listeners to take you through this long, long statement. And to ensure that it's fully delivered, I've been directed by my media advisor that I stand here instead of standing in front of you. But I'm not going to give you a lot of pain. And take into account that we need to have space for question and answer, which is really the meat of the discussion. I've summarized the 45-page statement. I left out some of the items, but it's going to be given to you in its totality so that you have a complete picture of what the African Continental Free Trade Area is. And certainly, I'm very happy to see all of you. You look very live, you look very expectant, and I think I will not be able to disappoint you. The issue I was requested to look at basically is to say, what is the African Continental Free Trade Area? And what is the state of implementation of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area? And what happens after the launch of the operational phase of the African Continental Free Trade Area agreement in Niamey in July this year? And like I indicated, I'm going to summarize the issue. So, what is the African Continental Free Trade Area? The most straightforward answer to this question is that the African Continental Free Trade Area is a new established and integrating African market supported by a comprehensive legal framework and offering attractive investment and trade opportunities. Of course, that tends to be rather abstract, so there's need to give some substance to that answer. And I can begin by saying that the vision of the African Continental Free Trade Area is to create a single integrated African market. And when we have done that, basically it means that all the 55 member states of the African Union are state parties to the agreement establishing this institution. And by being state parties, it means two things. They've signed the agreement and they've deposited the instrument of ratification. And then the process of integration goes further. Signing and ratifying are not enough. You need to embark on a process of harmonizing domestic laws, domestic regulations, so that you have a truly seamless arrangement where if one good or service moves from South Africa to Togo, for example, along the way, it is not going to be subjected to new standards of examination to say it cannot pass through our national territory because it does not meet these standards. We are going to have a uniform standards. And why do we need an integrated market? Last night I told you that when you look at Africa, it's a continent of fragmented states. I don't know if some of you tried to look at the map of Africa, from Mauritius to Cape Verde. How many countries are you expected to cross? About 7 of them. And again, if you want to move from Cape Town to Cairo, how many countries are you expected to cross? About 12 countries. And if you are moving from the east coast of the United States of America to the west coast, New York to Los Angeles, is still one country. And again, if you're moving from the southern tip of Brazil to the northern tip, Salvador, this is still one country, but the distances are almost similar. So that is the state of Africa. A lot of small countries, and by history, not connected. They're isolated. And they're not competitive in the global arena. And because they are small markets, they cannot attract large-scale investments. And the cycle of poverty continues as a result. And that's why we decided to create one integrated market. And when we have done that, we're going to resolve a number of immediate challenges that Africa faces. I indicated that because of small market, we cannot attract investments. And the poverty gets entrenched. And because of the small market, we've made attempts at industrialization, at economic diversification. It has not gone very, very far. And because of small markets, we have not been very, very competitive. So when we create this market, the population immediately becomes aggregated. Right now, the aggregate population of Africa is 1.2 billion people. And in 11 years, 2030, is going to be 1.7 billion people. And in this demography, Africa is the youngest continent in the world. And with this large market now, which is integrated, you remove the excuse that we cannot invest because of a small market. You remove the excuse that we cannot produce in one African country and export to the rest of Africa because of differing rules and regulations. All those are done away under the African Continental Free Trade Area. And as a result of that, new opportunities emerge. And I'll just talk about 5 of them so that you do not go to sleep. And I do not go through a 45-minute page presentation. With a large market and large-scale investments and long-term, of a long-term nature, it means that the prospects for higher rates of economic growth in Africa are going to emerge. And when there are these prospects, then business can also be encouraged to innovate. And because we expect innovation to be part of the African economic landscape, we have decided that the 2020 edition of the Intra-African Trade Fair is going to have a pavilion specifically for the youth who have come up with start-up projects, and we're going to link them to venture capital firms. So these are some of the opportunities that are emerging. And of course, with this impressive picture, and I'm sure some of you are from the financing world, you should be thinking that, is it possible to come up with an African Continental Free Trade Area bond which can be used to finance startups and SMEs? So that's an added opportunity that is coming up. And of course, when you've got a large market, the other opportunity that emerges is that it will now be possible to come up with very viable and long-term projects of economic diversification and transformation. Indicated that Africa has been isolated historically, and that is very, very true. If you look at the rail networks around Africa, they were designed in such a way that they would take produce to the metropole. If the colonies were British colonies, they were designed to take raw materials to London. If the colonies were French colonies, they were designed to take raw materials to France. And there was no connection among them. Now, with the creation of this market, we're going to really encourage the evolution of the development of interconnectivities among the African countries. And already we've got a group of African investors who call themselves the Afro champions. They came to us and said, we want to work with you. And we entered into a memorandum of understanding. And one of their immediate areas of focus was how to promote linkages in transport and communications among African countries. And they've come up with a financing framework which is going to ensure that within 10 years from 2019, the annual infrastructure gap in financing, the annual gap in financing infrastructure across Africa, which is around about $70 billion US, is going to be overcome within 10 years. So this is the opportunity that has emerged, and the Afro champions are coming up to take up that. There are also opportunities in the area of education. Africa has a growing population, and Africa has a young population. And in this digital age, education and skills development are very, very paramount. And it will be possible to come up with large-scale establishments which can cater for many African countries. And we are getting inquiries from a number of businesses on how to come up with investments in the area of skills development. And then there's also the opportunity of growing intra-African trade. And this was immediately foreseen by the African Export-Import Bank. But before I go into this, let me tell you a short story. Back home in 2013, I was a board member of the Zambia International Trade Fair Board. And in one of the board meetings, we are really coming up with ways and means of ensuring that we transform it into a business-to-business trade fair. I suggested to the board members that we come up with ways and means of working with the African Union to revive the All Africa Trade Fair. And everybody burst out laughing. because they thought it was a crazy idea, and the African Union is a political organization. When I came to the AU in 2017, I told the team that I had the idea of reviving the All Africa Trade Fair to really give life to trade information in the action plan on boosting intra-African trade. And in no time, one of my young officers linked me to Professor Orama. And we agreed that instead of calling it the All Africa Trade Fair, we call it the Intra-African Trade Fair. And that was born. And the people back home in Zambia said, we are sorry. We didn't know that it could be like this. But we gave it new life. All of you, some of you were in Cairo last year. I think you saw what was there. Everything was above target on exhibitions, above target on business-to-business transaction. And we are going to ensure that under the African Continental Free Trade Area, the Intra-African Trade Fair series will be a crucial part on boosting intra-African trade. And beyond this, there are also very good prospects for the growth of intra-African trade fair, of intra-African trade. Studies by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa have indicated that if we finalize the process of trade liberalization this year, and we intended to do it by this year, by 2022, intra-African trade is going to grow by 52.3%, which is a large jump. They've also calculated that if we remove non-tariff barriers, which sometimes are a huge impediment to the growth, to trade, that is going to jump by another 52.3%, which will be 100%. So it's possible that by 2022, intra-African trade as a result of trade liberalization and removal of non-tariff barriers should be around 36% or above. So I've answered what the African Continental Free Trade Area is and the new opportunities that it is offering. May I now look at the current state of implementation of the agreement. This is a legal instrument, and because it's a legal instrument, it gives predictability to business. If they want to move into the market, they are sure that the rules and regulations are not going to change overnight, or they are not going to be changed because they've moved in while others are being favored. They will be very impartial. And it was opened for signature on the 21st March in Kigali last year. And as a legal instrument, it has a number of elements. The first one is the framework agreement, which formally and legally establishes the African Continental Free Trade Area. And when it was opened for signature, 3 protocols were also finalized and part of that framework agreement. The first one is the protocol on trade in goods, and the second is the protocol on trade in services, and the third one is the protocol on rules and procedures on the settlement of disputes. And this is very important for the issue of predictability. If there's a dispute, you use legal means to resolve them. And since there is impartiality, there is also fairness. And these protocols have annexes and appendices. As a legal instrument and as a trade agreement, key to the agreement is the issue of trade liberalization. If we have to create an integrated market, we must remove tariff barriers. And for this reason, in the early stages of negotiation of the agreement, we agreed on a level of ambition of 90% of tariff liberalization of a period of 10 years for what we call the developing countries within the group, and 13 years for the group we call the least developed countries. And it is our expectation that the agreed level of ambition is going to spur manufacturing and in the process increase trade in manufactured goods. And this is already good news because right now, even before the agreement has come into force, 42% of intra-African trade is in manufactured goods. And this is a huge contrast to the fact that almost 90% of Africa's trade to the rest of the world is made up of commodities. But within Africa, 42% of intra-African trade is made up of manufactured goods. I promise to leave some of the material, so I'll move to the next issue, which is the issue of the launch of the operational phase of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Before this was done, we had to go through a process of achieving the minimum number of ratifications. We had to go through a very strong advocacy program to ensure that this is done within a year. But when we left Kigali last year, the legal officers were telling us that you may be disappointed if you think that you can achieve ratification within a year. In the African Union system, it takes about 5 years for a legal instrument to enter into force. And that would have meant that the agreement was opened for signature in 2018, and we should only expect it to enter into force in 2023. But we sat as a team and said, let us make a difference. And we decided to make a difference. So we embarked on a very strong advocacy program. And on 29th April this year, we received the 22nd instrument of ratification. And went to the lawyers to say, instead of 5 years, we have been able to have ratification in a period of 1 year, 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day. Which was very unprecedented in the history of lawmaking in the African Union system. And the agreement specifies that 30 days after receiving the 22nd instrument of ratification, the agreement enters into force. And the agreement entered into force on the 30th May 2019. And so far, we have 27 ratifications. 27 countries have deposited instruments of ratification. And we have got 54 countries that have signed the agreement. The only country that has not signed the agreement is Eritrea. And they felt the pressure in Niamey and rose to announce to the rest of Africa that give us a little time. Very soon, we are also going to sign. So very soon, all the 55 African Union member states are going to be signatories. Now, when we include Eritrea, we are remaining with the 28 countries that are yet to sign. And we are in discussions with a lot of those countries. And some of them, like Nigeria, and Morocco have said very, very, very soon we are going to depose instruments of ratification. So we are confident that when trading starts on the 1st of July 2020, the remaining 28 countries will be ratifying. And therefore, we shall realize the vision of creating one African market, in the sense that all the 55 African Union member states will be state parties to the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. The state of play or the state of implementation can also be looked at the administrative side. I didn't hear that. Yes. So at the administrative side, we are the interim secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and we have a number of tasks. One of the tasks is to establish the permanent secretariat itself, which is going to be located in Ghana. Ghana won the bid to host the permanent secretariat. Thank you very much. And in facilitating that, by the end of this year, which is December, the African Union Commission and the government of Ghana must conclude a hosting agreement. And early next week, a team will be going to Ghana to start the discussions. And then we are also developing the organizational structure for the new secretariat. And member states are saying, please don't make it too large. We have said it will be informed by the agreement and the protocols. But they say, we know that, but don't make it too large. So we are working on organizational structure, and it is our expectation that that organizational structure will be approved by December this year. And related to that, we are also working on the budget and the work program for the new secretariat. So there's also state of play with respect to the issue of market access. Here, all I can state that member states are required to finalize their tariff offers covering 90% of tariff lines by end of September 2019, and tariff offers covering the remaining 10% of tariff lines by the end of November 2019. And then they are also required to make final schedules of tariff concessions and submit them to the January summit in 2020. So member states are very busy in this connection. Then there's also the state of play with respect to trade in services. Globally, trade in services is really becoming a very important component of international trade, and Africa is also capturing that. Here, member states are required to undertake 3 key activities. First, they must finalize their schedules of specific commitments in 5 priority areas, and these are business services, communication services, financial services, transport services, and tourism services. And these are to be submitted to the January 2020 summit. And in addition to this, and this is very key to creating an integrated market, member states are also required to finalize work on regulatory cooperation frameworks by June 2020, and thereafter conclude the remaining work in the services sector by December 2020. Of course, the agreement cannot work in isolation and can not only be left to the governments to operate. We need to engage a lot of stakeholders. These are the private sector, the civil society, and international cooperating partners. And with respect to international cooperating partners, almost on a daily basis, I get a request to go and address some business people in other countries about the African Continental Free Trade Area. Well, I get requests that I brief a visiting dignitary about the African Continental Free Trade Area. So there's a lot of interest globally about the African Continental Free Trade Area. With respect to the private sector, we have a number of frameworks, one of which is the Pan-African Private Sector Investment and Trade Committee, which is eventually going to be the African Business Council. And through here, we are bringing the private sector to participate in the trade policy formulation, negotiation, and implementation. Then we also have the African Business Forum, which inaugurated in 2018. And here we bring business to interact with heads of state and other policymakers to look at ways and means of improving the business environment. And it was through this forum that the Afro Champions Initiative outlined a framework to facilitate financing of infrastructure investments across Africa. And then we're also in the process of developing what is going to be called a web-based and mobile-based African Continental Free Trade Area business application. Basically, through a smartphone, you'll be able to have access to all the information that you need regarding the African Continental Free Trade Area. And through that, you'll also be able to ensure that you receive trade alerts on the movement of your goods if they are moving from one African country to the next African country. And you resolve that in real time. And of course, this is an inclusive process. We are working with the regional economic community to ensure that the small-scale cross-border traders are fully facilitated. They are not going to be left out of the picture. And through the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, we have been assured by the African Export-Import Bank that we will be able to capture informal cross-border trade. And this is a huge figure. According to the African Export-Import Bank, annually, there's close to $60 billion to $90 billion worth of cross-border trade, which is not accounted for. And the annual figure of Africa's intra-African trade is $170 billion US. So you can say almost more than half of that is unaccounted for. Now, if you bring it into the picture, you can see that the level of intra-African trade could be as high as 40% right now. So this is a long-hanging fruit, and we hope that we'll be able to capture those trade statistics as soon as the Pan-African Payments and Settlement Platform starts working. We're also engaging with the civil society. And we had a very, very successful civil society forum in Niamey, where they were briefed on where we are in the African Continental Free Trade Area, and they were able to make suggestions, and they requested that it should be institutionalized. And we agreed that we are going to have it as an annual event. I promise to be very brief, and I think I'm doing very well. Yes. And I cannot see anybody dozing. There's nobody dozing. Yes. So at this stage, let me look at what lies beyond the launch of the operational phase of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The launch was done on 7th July in Niamey this year. And actually, we are honored to ensure that the African diaspora from the United States of America and the Caribbean came with a full force of 17 people to witness the launch, which was very, very historic. And it brought out a number of issues that we are going that would require us to look at. And the first issue is that we need to continue sensitization so that by 1st July 2020, the remaining 28 countries that have not signed or ratified do so that we have all the 55 African Union countries becoming state parties. Then there's also work for the member states. We have called on all of them to continue the program of sensitizing business so that they are aware of the opportunities offered by the African Continental Free Trade Area. And when they are aware, then business should be in a position where they start planning investments to scale the market. Some may need to go into joint ventures. Some may have the capacity already, but they'll need to come up with the logistics facilities across the various segments of this market. And we hope that the member states will really enhance the process of sensitization. And of course, it's very important that business scales up manufacturing so that they are able to really operate the market. And on our part, we are also going to ensure that we facilitate the implementation of the SME strategy in the African Union with the small and medium enterprise strategy. And we are going to ensure that we continue promoting the development of startups. And we are going to continue promoting the development of the Pan-African fashion industry. And we're also going to continue promoting the development of the pharmaceutical industry. And of course, we're also going to promote the continued development of the automotive value chain project. And yesterday, I met one of the promoters here, which is very, very good. We established linkages, and we're going to work very closely together. And we're also encouraging business associations across Africa to ensure that they come up with a network of continental level institutions. Already, the mining sector have come up with what they call African Association of Chambers of Mines and Associated Industries. And they approached us to say, can we have a memorandum of understanding so that we work together? And they are working on that memorandum of understanding, and we look forward to signing it early next year during the Indaba, mining Indaba, which is going to be held in Cape Town, and it's usually held in Cape Town. And we have also encouraged manufacturers across Africa to come up with a Pan-African or Manufacturers Association of Africa so that we also enter into a memorandum of understanding so that they can be participating in our meetings with the ministers, and they come up with the proposals that are needed to ensure that we promote the development of manufacturing across Africa. We're also working very closely with the regional economic communities. Under the African Union structures, they are what we call the building blocks to the African economic community. The African economic community is supposed to be established by 2028 under the Abuja Treaty, which was signed in 1991. And the African Continental Free Trade Area is a component part of that. And when it was signed, the regional economic communities were designated as building blocks. And with this institution now coming into force, there are a number of areas where we need to collaborate with them. One of which is trade facilitation. Also ensuring that we've got harmonized system of facilitating informal cross-border trade. as well as issues of development of infrastructure across Africa, and the issue of trade, the detection of trade deflection. Trade deflection comes if and when members in the free trade area have different levels of tariffs with third parties. For example, if a third-party country X has a zero tariffs with a member of the African Continental Free Trade Area, with which you call country Y. Country Y can be tempted to get those goods from country X, bring them in the territory, relabel them as made in country Y, and export them to the rest of the market. And this is a real danger that we're going to face. And that is what they call in the technical term trade deflection. So to this end, before the end of this year, we are going to come up with a collaborative framework between ourselves and the regional economic communities to see how we can work in the promotion of intra-African trade. I think I've said quite a lot. Let's go towards discussion, but let me conclude by saying that in our numerous engagements with the large US businesses, they've always come to us with the two concerns. Their first concern is that the African markets are very, very small. They want to invest in Togo, the market is very small. We want to invest in Zambia, the market is very small. We want to invest in Ethiopia, the market is very small. Then they've also complained that it's very, very difficult to move goods across Africa. If I invest in Togo and I want to move goods to Ghana, I'm going to face some rules and regulations which make it difficult. I want to move to the next country, I'm going to face the same problem. So early on, I said that problem has been resolved. It has been resolved by the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. It has been resolved by ensuring that there's going to be a framework for regulatory collaboration or cooperation among the member states so that we don't have conflicting rules and regulations. And it's going to be finally resolved by ensuring that we create an internal market where all the domestic rules and regulations are going to be harmonized so that we truly have an integrated African market. So this is the market which has been formed. It's yearning for your participation. Mobilize investments, and we shall going to give you a red carpet. Thank you for your attention. Okay, all right.
Good morning. Who is here, who in this room is from Africa? Show of hands. Hi.
Very impressive.
There's a number of them. Who is not from Africa but has been on the African continent? Who's doing business with Africa? Who's ready to do business with Africa? Beautiful. Right. Yeah. You know why I ask all those questions? Because we have the commissioner from the African Union in charge of trade and industry. And all the questions that you've had for I don't know how long will be answered today by the commissioner. So we have an app. I think in a minute it's going to go up. Slido, you'll go on, send in your questions, as we will be asking those questions. The reason we're doing that is we're trying to go away from spending a lot of time. So I'll be asking the questions on your behalf. But as we start, this was more of a dream, but we're seeing it now fruitioning, coming into reality. And it took time for Africa to bring up something like the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the largest free trade area in the world. My name is Michael Mjisha. I'm a senior producer, news anchor with CNBC Africa. That is the largest news business channel in Africa, period. Yeah, we're not in contest with anyone. And Dr. Albert, I just want us to start from some of the basics. We're looking at $50 to $70 billion to be, generated by this free trade area. Of course, moving into the 2040s, but of course, looking at a speed of a 52% growth on intra-African trade, at least by 2024. You recently said that Africa will no longer hold a begging bowl, but looking at creating our own future with this trade. And that is quite a firm belief and, positivity around the trade area. But I want you to, again, at the same time, because we are in America, not at home, I want you to give this same message to investors who are seated in here today. What don't they already know? Not from a politician perspective, but more from a business perspective. Why should they be looking at the AfCFTA? Why should they be investing with Africa, doing trade with Africa? And how does that stand to benefit them as businesses? You may take it away.
Well, there are a number of factors. The first one is the demographic factor. If you look around the world today, Africa has the youngest population in the world. Then the other factor, which is also equally of a demographic nature, is that the middle class is growing fastest in the emerging economies. Not many years ago, 60% of private consumption was in the developed world. As we speak right now, it's 50%, 50%. 50% of private consumption is in the developed world, and 50% of private consumption is in the emerging world, which is Africa is part of it. So there's going to be growing private consumption in Africa. And for perceptive business, that is a huge opportunity. Because it means that if you're producing that market, the commodities or the products are going to be bought immediately. And the bottom line will go up. So as a result of that, what Africa needs right now are investments. Investments, not aid.
Congratulations on reaching, of course, the number of signatories that you needed to kick off this market. But signing is one thing, and enactment is a totally different thing. And we want to see how much political willingness are we looking at from the African heads of states or their governments to ratify the AfCFTA so we can see it start to work and also do away with the non-tariff barriers. Because I was speaking to business people from Kigali. I was there when it was signed. And one of the biggest questions were, we are looking at a case here of you have goods coming from Tanzania through to Kigali or to the Democratic Republic of Congo. You will be taxed at each and every border you go to, entering a country. And that was very big for the businesses. Now, even more big for small and medium enterprises, which are growing on the continent, providing about 70% of the jobs that are currently on the continent. How do you see this, or how fast should we expect that to be done away with?
I think it's going to be very, very fast. Let me go back to Kigali. The day before the agreement was going to be signed, we worked in the room as a team. We went to each and every member state to find out how many countries were going to sign. And when the books or the agreement was opening for signature, we were sure that only 28 countries were going to sign. But the trick we did was also to publicize the signing ceremony. And some of the heads of state and government were able to see the evolution of the signing ceremony, and they were in Kigali. So they gave instructions to their heads of delegations. You go and sign. So we had a record for 4 countries signing in Kigali itself. And 3 months later, another 5 countries signed. And then by February this year, another 52 countries signed. And when in Niamey, 2 more countries signed, which brings it to 54. This shows the strong political will that the heads of state and government attach. And then come to ratifications. I indicated in my speech that we were advised by the legal counsel that it takes about 5 years for the agreement to enter into force. We did it in slightly over a year, which is unprecedented. Again, it shows the commitment that is there. When we went to the operational phase, launch of the operational phase, all the 55 African Union member states were there. None of them was absent. And they readily stated that by 1st July, they are going to be ready to start trading. So there's that strong political will. And there's also a realization that the history of fragmentation that we have gone through since independence has economically not served Africa well. Let's seize the new opportunities offered by a larger market. And that commitment is there from all the heads of state and government.
At the extraordinary summit that happened in Kigali again, most of the business people or from the private sector had, this kind of saying that we hope that we get to understand exactly what we are to benefit from the AfCFTA. And that brought me to, questioning, was there enough consultation from the private sector? Because, well, they are the ones to run the trade after all. So did the African Union do enough consultation before bringing up the AfCFTA?
We did, because as a result of the Kigali summit, the private sector decided to organize this at 2 levels. The first level was to establish the Afro Champions Initiative or club. And they requested to have a memorandum of understanding with us. And we quickly facilitated. I signed it on behalf of the commission. So we have a working arrangement with the Afro Champions. And in order to demonstrate appreciation for the good work, in Kigali, in March last year, the Afro Champions pledged $1 million to facilitate advocates for the ratification of the agreement. And they fulfilled that pledge. They gave us that amount of money. It's not always that we find such commitments from the African private sector. Then we also decided to relaunch the Pan-African Private Sector Trade and Investment Committee, which was dormant some time back, because they saw a huge opportunity for them to participate in the trade policy negotiations, formulation, and implementation. And the ministers allowed them to be attending future meetings. So the private sector is being fully involved. The miners decided on their own to create a Pan-African Chamber of Mines, which is working now on a memorandum of understanding with us. They saw the opportunity. The accountants and auditors requested me to go and address them in Cape Town early this year, and I encouraged them to come up with a memorandum of understanding so that we can have such a cooperative framework. They're working on that. So the private sector is fully involved. And at a national level, there's a decision of the summit that we should have African Continental Free Trade Area national committees. And part of the membership to those committees should be the private sector. They are fully involved. So we are working very, very closely with them. And there is also an already existing institution, the Pan-African Chambers of Commerce and Industry, whose headquarters is in Addis Ababa. They have been participating in all the negotiations. So the private sector is fully involved.
Earlier on, you talked about market access, and I want to bring it back, but also with consultation in question. You brought forward the dates for negotiation, and of course to do with the tariff schedules. Mm-hmm. Why was that?
Bringing forward the dates for I don't know what you mean by that.
The negotiations for the tariff schedules, they were brought forward, and you were part of the movement. So why was that brought forward? Well,
the thing is that we wanted to ensure early start of trading. Mm-hmm. You see, when the agreement entered into force, if you stall the process, then the momentum goes down. And when the momentum goes down, new problems can emerge. So to ensure that we maintain the commitment to deliver on time and in full, then we say we must commit ourselves to doing a very good job. And in order to, as aid member states, we've come up with an application where each member state can upload their tariff offers online, and their password is protected. So this makes it much easier to reach out to all the member states, and they can be communicating. So with that, then it will be possible to come to some understanding. Basically, in negotiations of this nature, it's always who is going to move first. A lot of countries have already prepared their tariff schedules, but they don't want to be the first ones to upload them to the rest of the membership. Right. And that's why we said, let's come up with a password protected. And that is encouraging a lot of them to upload.
And Ambassador Muchanga, from where you stand, do you think this has left the member states with enough time to do consultations with their own private sector?
It has given a lot of them. Throughout the negotiation, we have said, each time there's a decision, bring it to the private sector. And some of the countries have done that. I think Nigeria is one of the countries which undertook a very broad-based consultative process. They consulted the private sector, they consulted the civil society, they consulted the regional governors and everybody. So other member states have been undertaking those consultations. The key issue is that this is a major change program. And in any change situation, there is always resistance to change because you don't know what tomorrow brings. There's always fear of the unknown. That's the first element. The second element is that some businesses have grown as monopolies in several African countries. Now, all of a sudden, they are required to compete, and the monopolies are supposed to end, which means that they're going to lose a very attractive profit center. They'll come up with the ways and means of ensuring that this is not done. And we are aware of those mindsets. And we are discussing with the businesses concerned to say, see a big picture of really contributing to the growth of Africa by opening up and engaging in competition and innovation.
For, the intra-African trade, of course, to fruition, we're looking at some of the things that could be done, and there is diversification of products, exports, and of course, product sophistication. But what measures are in place to ensure that African countries can do that? Because if you look back maybe between 2011 to 2017, only about 3 countries, that is Senegal, Rwanda, I'm trying to remember the other country, have been able to diversify their exports. Do you see a way this could be done?
Well, key to this is the development of regional and continental value chains, which are also linked to global value chains. A number of producers around the world are going to come up with global value chain factories in Africa because of the opportunity that is there. A large market and a growing middle class. Now, the process of diversification stalled in quite a number of countries because of a limited market. And some of it was based on import substitution. And immediately there was a shortage of foreign exchange. The process of deindustrialization set in. So there are a number of factors that led to that. But through the development of continental and regional value chains, each country will have something to participate in as far as manufacturing is concerned. Let's take the example of the motor industry. There's an expert here. There are so many components in a motor vehicle. You need electrical wiring, you need the car seats, and you need other components, including tires. They can be produced in several parts of Africa. Then you assemble them in the final part. Airbus is using that model. So there's no reason why we cannot use it in Africa. If you go to East Africa, one of the apparels of huge demand is the West African fashion wear. If you develop for the fashion industry, there's no need why we cannot develop the fashion industry on that basis. And when you look at global level, there is emerging demand for African fashion. Not too long ago, I was talking to one of the Africans based in London. She was telling me that she came across a textile, ladies' apparel, with African fabrics. And it was in one of the upper market retail shops in London. It was going for £2,500. So the opportunity is there. It's for each and every country to say, here's a market that has been offered. Where do we have comparative advantage? And how do we make use of the opportunity?
Right. As we talk about the African continental free trade area, I want us to look back at the boosting intra-African trade action plan. What do we learn from this? Because we see it as also another framework that looks at, dealing with the constraints that our, traders face on the continent today. As the African Union, what are some of the key areas that you think you pick from the BIAT into the AfCFTA, and how can this bring about a different narrative? The AfCFTA, how different is it?
Well, the action plan on boosting intra-African trade, BIAT as we call it, has 7 clusters, one of which is trade policy, trade facilitation, productive capacities, trade-related infrastructure, trade information, trade finance, and factor market integration. Trade policy, we've delivered. We've created the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now the next stage is to come up with a Pan-African trade policy, which will be anchored on a common external tariff. That's work for the future. We are going to move towards the creation of an African Customs Union. That's work for the future. Trade facilitation. The work, there is an annex in the protocol on trade in goods, which is specifically anchored on trade facilitation, and it's also anchored on the African level implementation of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. So we have implemented that. Productive forces. We're talking of the development of regional value chains across Africa. Engagement of manufacturers across Africa. We are delivering on that one. Trade-related information indicated that the Afro champions have come up with a framework for increasing investments in trade-related infrastructure. We are delivering. Trade finance. That one is still a slight challenge, but the managing director is here. We're not going to immediately meet the annual financing gap of about 120 billion US dollars in trade finance that we are having. But between now and 2025, the African Export-Import Bank has made enough money to ensure that we meet that target. So there could still be some challenges. Trade information we've delivered at several levels. I talked of the web-based mobile application on the African Continental Free Trade Area. I talked of the Intra-African Trade Fair. And we're also creating an institution we are going to call the African Trade Observatory, which is going to give information on a wide range of issues related to the development of intra-African trade, including opportunities available for imports and exports within the African market, including their prices. The issue of market integration, factor market integration, there are two key elements there. The first one is free movement of people. There is already a protocol on the free movement of people, which is undergoing a process of signing and ratifications. So far, it has about 32 signatories and 2 ratifications. We need a minimum of 15 ratifications. Then capital market integration. With the development of a Pan-African payments and settlement platform, work is beginning to come up with a framework for facilitating capital market integration. So we are fully implementing the action plan on boosting intra-African trade.
Right. Dr. Muchanga, you mentioned something earlier on about specialization, and I like that we're here tonight in a room full of experts. I had a conversation with Mr. Hightower there. He specializes in automotive industry, right? When you look at the African continent, you definitely see that there are some regions that are dealing with a number of industries, right? Do you see a time where Africa, as trade grows, as intra-African trade grows, and of course looking to the liberalization and becoming a one body, a time where a country will specialize in a particular sector, per se, Nigeria with the oil industry, or South Africa with the automotive industry? Do you see this happening?
Well, I think the oil industry, if you talk of processing, yes, not the export of commodities. We're trying to move all African countries away from dependence on commodities. Because I think more or less it's becoming very, very difficult to anchor your development on a commodity dependence. Demand is faltering most of the time. So there is an element of value addition at every stage. For example, when we liberalize trade throughout Africa, and when we reach the final level of 100%, it means that if you export commodities to the rest of Africa, you're getting very, very little. It only makes sense if you do some value addition. Right now, work is underway at our level, the African Union, to come up with a mapping exercise on the development of value chains across Africa. When that mapping exercise is completed, we'll be able to have a complete picture of the potentials in each of the African countries, the 55 African countries. That is the first level. Then the second level is that we are going to use that mapping exercise to come up with the sector investment profiles, such that when an investor wants to participate in a certain sector, all they need is to come to us and we give them the information, and they can then start doing the work without having to come up with a very detailed feasibility study.
Only if this was up to me, I would have this conversation go on until tomorrow, but unfortunately it isn't. So I would like to go on and read out some of the questions. Mm-hmm. You are a superstar panelist. No problem. So many questions I see here, but I'll start from those that came in early as 10:33 a.m. Okay. Etiel asked the question: How is the AfCFTA going to deal with the sovereignty concerns, especially for small economies in Africa? I would also love to hear from you, because I'm from Rwanda, which is a rather smaller economy, emerging, but relatively small if you look at the other economies on the continent. So how does the AfCFTA plan to deal with the sovereignty concerns?
Well, the first issue is that by coming together, it means you are surrendering national sovereignty and pulling continental sovereignty. So by signing this agreement, countries have affirmed to themselves and the rest of the world that they are ready to pull continental sovereignty. That is the first issue. The second issue is that countries like Rwanda, what's the population of Rwanda?
We're looking at 12 million people.
12 million. All of a sudden, it has a market of 1.2 billion people.
Right.
So if a product is produced in Rwanda, it does not have to just forecast for that population of 12 million. It has to look at a big picture. And the history of regional integration is that it's actually the small countries that benefit most. You look at the EU, Ireland, Estonia, because of the smallness, when they export to the rest of the European Union, they benefit most. Similarly, during NAFTA, you look at the three countries, Canada, US, and Mexico. It was Canada and Mexico which are benefiting most because they are able to exploit larger economies of scale. So there's no fear about sovereignty.
Right. And Komi also asked you to explain how your team is planning to implement the rules of origin to avoid the dumping of cheap foreign goods into the African market.
That is what keeps me awake at night.
Interesting.
That's an issue that keeps me awake at night. And get it that the element is trade deflection. It's very, very, very difficult to monitor. The only long-term solution is that we need to move very fast towards an African customs union and a common market so that we have complete harmonization of tariff levels with third parties and also domestic regulations. When you do that, you have removed the problem permanently. But we are going to come up with a very elaborate monitoring framework, because under the agreement, we are expected to come up with an annual report to the ministers of trade indicating how we are implementing the agreement. So the issue of dumping or trade deflection is going to be closely monitored to see how we can resolve it. And if we see it as a growing phenomenon, then we'll tell the member states that let's not waste time. Let's move fast towards a customs union and internal market. And the foundations are already there. We've got the single African air transport market. We've got the protocol on free movement of people. And we're going to finalize negotiations on the protocol on investment, which will create a common investment area, the protocol on the competition policy, and the protocol on the intellectual property rights. All those are foundations of a common market. So just really getting the political will from member states to say, let's go towards a common external tariff and an internal market, then the problem will be resolved. But it's a real challenge.
All right. Ambassador Muchanga, we can't talk about trade if we cannot talk about infrastructure development. And this has to do with hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. You know, a gentleman or a lady, because it's anonymous in this room, had a question in regards to that. Like cross-border road transport plays a key role in Africa, carrying over 80% of goods. To what extent is the AfCFTA going to address transport challenges in Africa? I want you to be to be spot on this, and not only road transport, because still we're looking at air transport, which has grown tremendously on the African continent. But infrastructure is still an issue.
Yes.
How is the team at the African Union, of course in charge of the AfCFTA, looking to deal with this?
Well, I think the starting point is that, yes, the infrastructure landscape in Africa is quite fragile. We need to develop it. But the African Export-Import Bank is here. They've assured me that the current stock of infrastructure we have in Africa is capable of generating intra-African trade of about $1 trillion US. But that does not mean that we do not need to develop it. We need to develop it very rapidly. When you create a market of this nature, you excite a lot of people. Not too long ago, I had a company from South Africa, which has teamed up with a German company to develop an Africa-wide rail transport network. And I encourage them to join the Afro Champions Club, and they've done that. Then the Afro Champions Club came up with a financing framework which assured the heads of state and government in Niamey that within 10 years, we're going to end the infrastructure financing gap across Africa. Like you indicated, infrastructure is wide-ranging. The issue of energy is part of the question of infrastructure. The
communication too.
Yes, I'll come to that. The Afro Champions have looked at how we can make use of the Inga Dam. Already 15 African countries have mobilized to assure that they will be able to make use of the electricity that is generated from Inga Dam. And we're at advanced stages of trying to see if we can conclude a financing agreement around that. The issue of transport, we've got the single African air transport market. Nothing stops any African to join forces with the foreign partners to come up with the low-budget airlines across Africa. Now it's in the hands of the private sector. It's no longer in the hands of the government. So we're looking at all aspects of infrastructure, and I can say that I think with the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area, there are better prospects for ensuring that we move on a program of rapid infrastructure development.
With just about 14 minutes to the top of the hour, I want you to now come back to something to do with markets, of course, to do with the AGOA, which expires in 2025. Now, this is a question which I believe is from someone from here in the United States, probably an American business. They asked that, how will the AfCFTA play a role with trade relations with the United States, with the AGOA expiring in 2025?
Well, from here, I'm proceeding straight to Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, for the 18th edition of AGOA. And those are some of the issues that are going to come up in the picture. One of the key challenges from the African side is that AGOA is there, but a lot of African countries have not mobilized enough investments to produce products that could be sold in all the 50 states of the United States of America, and hence the high level of underutilization. So the African Continental Free Trade Area provides an opportunity to really scale up investments so that companies can trade both within Africa and to the United States of America. So that is going to be an opportunity. The third element is that AGOA is a unilateral program developed by the U.S. administration. It's not a negotiated instrument between Africa and the United States of America. So when now it comes to the end, the U.S. administration and the Congress will see to how to move to the next level. But from the African side, we have already communicated to the U.S. administration that our long-term interest to see if we can have a free trade agreement between Africa and the African Continental Free Trade Area and the United States of America. But that is just a suggestion where there's no agreement. The U.S. administration has other positions, but it's a matter under discussion. We have not yet come to a conclusive position. And let me indicate that a forum like this can be very useful in ensuring that we sensitize Africans on the opportunities available to make better use of the AGOA preferential scheme.
There's a very interesting concern in the room that there has been, we've seen trade blocks fail, and the question is, are there some lessons learned from failed existing regional trade agreements in order to avoid the same challenges? And the example was the ECOWAS market. Have you done a study around some of the trade blocks that have been set up but are not functioning?
Well, I don't know how you say ECOWAS is not functioning, because ECOWAS is a customs union. And not too long ago, ECOWAS announced that they are going to have the ECO, the single currency, by 2020. So when you say ECOWAS has failed, it's very, very difficult to say I agree with you. But the fundamental issue is that when we came up with the Abuja Treaty in 1991, we designated regional economic communities as building blocks. Now, the agenda for continental integration has come up. So the first stage is to create the continental framework, which we have done. Then when we move to the level of the African Customs Union, that's when the question of what to do with each of the regional economic communities is going to come up. And we're going to have a very detailed technical study on how to ensure that we align the programs of regional economic communities and the institutions within the African Customs Union that we're going to create. Because why that is so is because when we create the African Customs Union, we are going to have a common African external tariff. And it will be more or less monitored at the continental level, not at the regional level.
I want to just add a little bit of my thought on this question. Again, in another question that is exactly the same. I was speaking to Abdul Rabi Usamad, a Nigerian billionaire who deals with sugar and cement. And he mentioned something very interesting. It's very hard for them to do business with the Benin Republic, which is basically a neighboring country. Nigerians and the Benin, the trade is very hard, and they belong to the same trade bloc. On the other hand, East Africa is one of the emerging markets and fastest growing regional trade bloc. I think it was in March, we all learned of what happened with the closing of the borders, and you see trading stop coming to a halt, right? With such happening, and we're looking at coming together as a continent to do trade together, how does this hurt the ongoing process with the AfCFTA? How does it stand to hinder development on the continent?
Well, non-tariff barriers are a major impediment to development of intra-regional trade. And the nature of non-tariff barriers is that they are always more or less living devils, if I can use that term. You try to eliminate one non-tariff barrier today, another one will emerge in another form the next day. And this is worldwide. Even within the European Union, you find those challenges. What we have done is to come up with an online non-tariff barriers monitoring reporting and elimination mechanism, such that if a party has been subjected to NTBs, they will immediately report that to the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and they will ensure that they deal with the issue there and then. And if that fails, it goes to dispute settlement. So there will always be a challenge of non-tariff barriers. Governments, or even businesses, come up with various entities. Not too long ago, I was in Zambia. One would-be exporter was complaining to me that he has been trying for the past 3 months to get an export license to export soybeans to Rwanda. And the officials in the Ministry of Agriculture, the person who was supposed to sign, has not signed. I said, well, that's a non-tariff barrier. In the future, all you need is to report it to us, and we'll deal directly with the person involved.
Interesting. So you heard. If you find a problem like that one, please report to the AU.
Yes.
To the AU. Quick one though. I think I'll take two because time is upon us. China has been involved with Africa at a very interesting level financially. We're seeing a lot of infrastructure development projects coming up in Africa. As of recently, we saw the Djibouti Free Trade Zone coming up. And an interesting question from IBEC. What role does China play in all of this, since they have been heavily involved in most African countries in the recent years? I will also add my own question to that. What do we do if we find ourselves debt trapped?
How many of us read the Economist magazine for this week?
By show of hands.
By show of hands.
How many of you have read the Economist magazine
For this week.
For this week?
Yes. Not all of it. But did you see the caption on the evolving relationship between China and Russia? And you read it? Yes. What it tells you is actually what you're talking about. Russia is not just involved in Africa. It's all over the world. The issues that you're talking about to Africa, they are also experienced in Russia. They are also involved in the Bid and Road Initiative, BRI. But they've assured us in their engagements that it's supposed to be an arrangement of mutual gain. And they say not supposed, it's an arrangement of mutual gain. And quite a number of African countries have clearly stated that we need longer-term maturities so that Africans don't go into a debt trap. When we went to China not too long ago, those concerns were raised. So the key issue is that it's the fate of each and every African countries, each and every country, to really study its debt profile. Am I be able to repay these loans that I'm getting? If the question is no, then we should not get them. All right. Yes, so let's not just blame the lender. We should also look at ourselves. Yes, we should look at ourselves. Don't borrow recklessly. Scrutinize, study. Yes.
All right, I would like to thank Dr. Ambassador Albert Muchanga for the wonderful knowledge that he's shared with us about the AfCFTA. I hope that as the Trade with Africa Summit goes on, we are able to learn, communicate, network, and do business together. The last one, however, was if the AfCFTA has a plan for African Americans or Africans that live in America to deal with Africa, to do business with Africa. That's the last one. If there is a plan, please let us know. And that'll be the last one. Thank you so much.
Okay, before I answer that question, let me indicate that in my work, I've received a lot of titles. Sometimes I'm called chief. Sometimes I'm called professor. Sometimes I'm called the doctor like you did. And it's none of the above. But I earned the title of ambassador because in our system, you're an ambassador for life. I served as a professional ambassador. I'm an ambassador for life. But thank you for the honorary title of a doctor. The Afro-Americans were very excited when the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement came into force. And I think one of them, the senior Afro-Americans, I think it's Al Sharpton, made a statement that we should raise dollar for dollar in support of the African Continental Free Trade Area. That is the first point. The second point is that 17 of them came to Niamey, in addition to those, including those from the Caribbean. Then the third element is that they would like to have a continuous program of engagement with the Department of Trade and Industry of the African Union. I'm going to visit a number of cities in September, such as the US, Washington DC, not the US, Washington DC, Dallas, and Los Angeles, among others, where I'm going to discuss with the Afro-Americans on the opportunities offered by them. And in those discussions, I would like us to work together to develop a program of cooperation with them. Some of them really see a lot of opportunities offered by the new market, and they want to participate in it. And they say, if we cannot really invest directly, we can use other parties to invest. So a stakeholder which is very, very interested, and we are accommodating them in our engagements. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Muchanga. A round of applause for the gentleman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.